My name is Ercilia Mataobisi, and I'm with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our event today. We're starting off a little bit late, but we have a jam-packed program today, and obviously a lot of enthusiastic conversation is going to come out of it. So a bit of background as to why today, why we're here, and what is this conversation that we're going to be having today. So the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs is an organization, a member-based network that works and brings together a variety of organizations that are dedicated to strengthening and bolstering entrepreneurship across the world, and particularly in developing economies. So we are spread out across 8 different chapters, but in Africa we have 3 chapters, in Southern Africa, West Africa, and East Africa. I have the privilege of leading the Southern Africa chapter together with my colleagues, and we want to take advantage of this momentous occasion where South Africa is holding the presidency of the G20, and to foster a few conversations alongside the G20 process to engage around building and contributing into policy. We have a unique opportunity right now to not just speak for ourselves as South Africa, as the host, but also speak for the continent, being that South Africa is the only African country in the G20 at the moment, and the first time that this presidency is being hosted in the African continent. We have a responsibility, we feel, to have these conversations and to open these conversations a little broader. We already know that the G20 process is a complex one. It includes and involves a number of different organizations, many of them in this room. However, we also know that there's a lot of voices that are not in those rooms. And also, we would like to be able to support that process by bringing some of those conversations into practical action, considering, and today we'll invite you to take a different approach. It's not going to be a talk shop. We are not going to have a big panel. We are not going to, just have you listen to us. We're going to do that for a little bit in terms of setting up context. But then after that, we're going to invite you to think through a couple of questions and come up with practical actions that we could, not just as South Africa, but as a continent, and that could be universally applicable, that we could take forward in terms of expanding and deepening the participation and engagement of women across the entrepreneurship ecosystem. In particular today, we are going to be looking at financial inclusion and all of that means at policy level all the way down to actual access. And we have the privilege of inviting to help us shape this conversation one of our members, the Graça Machel Trust, and they will take us through some of the work and the evidence that they have gathered around what could be a futuristic but attainable scenario for women in finance. We also would like to thank and recognize our sponsors. We have also other members that are sponsoring this journey and really making sure that we can gather in this fantastic venue and have these fantastic conversations and hopefully have great takeaways from it. For this particular session, our partners and sponsors are the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation as well as E Squared. So we invite you to engage. We invite you to ask questions. We've already been told this is a small enough gathering, and we were being very specific. I think it's important to mention, very specific in the invitations. So it was not just, we hope somebody comes. We intentionally wanted each one of you in the room today because we were hoping that you would come, because we need your perspective and your insights and your input based on your own lived experiences and what you know is possible within this space. So we invite you to share that and to participate and engage and to ask difficult questions and to help us find, innovative answers to all of them. Today, our program is going to be a split. We're not going to have you sitting down the whole time. We will start in here, having a conversation, setting up the context, and really getting into what it is that we're going to be biting into. And then after that, we will ask you to move outside and to separate into groups. Each of you will have received already Am I good? Okay. Each of you will have received or will have a set of a worksheet with you. If you don't have a worksheet, please let us know. We'll make sure that we can get you one. A worksheet. Okay, so along with your agenda, you will have a worksheet that is going to define the group that you're going to be set out to for the discussions later. In those discussions, we're going to ask you to really try to get deep into it. And like I said, ask all of the difficult questions. We'll then come back from those discussions and then present each group will present what we will have gathered from those discussions. All right, so with that, I'd like to hand over to the Graça Machel Trust. Thelma, if you could please take the stage and take us forward.
Morning, everyone. It's really good to see some familiar faces in the room. And we are particularly, as the Trust, really excited about this morning, and want to thank Ursula and Tobeka, who have been really pivotal in us getting to this moment. Just a bit of context from our point of view is we got involved with this series through Ursula reaching out to us because of the work that we've also been getting involved in around the G20 series. And I think it's been very important because as the Trust, we are particularly very focused around women and financial inclusion. So we've been working in different aspects to involve ourselves in making sure that the agenda for progressing women financial inclusion is continuing to go further. So part of the work that we are doing is at the Trust we have the Expert Leaders Group, which really works with the current and former governors to work around advocacy with regards to financial inclusion. So this is part of the work that we are doing, and I think this series that we have been involved in is part of the work that we are going to get involved. This is just context setting. I think my colleagues, there's Majita here and as well as Zim, are going to speak around the different aspects that we are getting involved in when it comes to financial inclusion. My role this morning, so let me get back to my role. My role this morning is really to talk a little bit about the Trust and to tell you who we are and what is the work that we are getting involved in. So I've got a slide show that I'm just going to walk you through, and hopefully I know some of you in the room are familiar with the Trust, but for those of you who are not, this is an opportunity for us to just tell you a little bit more. Thank you to all the people in the room who've made it this morning. We really appreciate you being here. I'm going to just step back a little bit and hopefully speak from here, just to check if I'm audible, if the pace is right. It's rather quiet. So hopefully we're all good. Yeah. So the Graça Machel Trust is actually headquartered here in Johannesburg. We've got a satellite office in Nairobi. We as an organization are in 20 countries. I've got this map just to show the countries that we're in. And part of the work that we do in these 20 countries is through the networks. And in the next few slides, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the networks. We are a civil society committee member of the AFDB. And we've been appointed as the lead with observer status on AU's Committee of Experts and the Rights and Welfare of the Child. We also serve as the Secretariat of the East and Southern Africa Civil Society Networks for Nutrition. So part of the work that we're doing, previously we worked a lot around nutrition, and so that's where we got that status. We have since really streamlined some of the efforts that we do, and we're focusing more around financial inclusion and some of the other areas which I will speak to as well. So just a little bit about our strategic goals. We've got 5 key strategic goals, and in these strategic goals it governs the way that we work. So the first one is really accelerating women's economic advancement. This forms part of the anchor program that we have, which is the Women Creating Wealth program. And I see this morning some of our entrepreneurs. I see Christine there. So it's really good to have you in the room as well, as testament of the work that we're doing around bringing women into the financial inclusion as well as into the conversation. We also work around powering the Pan-African socio-economic transformation through collective action. as well as championing Pan-African adolescent girls as change agents. And this is something that we're also really passionate about, because as women, as we stand in this room today, we were once girls. And I think the belief is that if we can work with the girls when they are young, you know, we are raising champions of change. So that is really the thinking around the adolescent girls movement, and it's really teaching the young girls about the policies, about the things that affect them at a young age, with the hope that when they grow up, you know, we have girls that are informed. We also have archiving the legacies of African women leaders, as well as institutions strengthening and building sustainability. So those are our strategic goals as an organization. I can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the work that we do our work through the networks. And I think this morning we have Zim, who's here, who forms part of one of our networks, which is the New Faces, New Voices. And at a later on stage, she's going to speak a little bit about it. So part of it is, these are the networks that we work through, and I just want to explain to you the networks that we work with. So I'm going to move a little bit to this side. So the first network that we work with is the African Women in Agribusiness Network, and across the different countries. So in some countries we work with all the networks, and in some countries we work with some of the networks. And part of the reason why we work with the networks is we firmly believe that the work that needs to be delivered in most of these countries is championed by the women in these networks. They understand what is being done at grassroots. They understand the work that needs to be done at grassroots level. So that is the reason why we've opted to go through the option of working through our networks. The next network that we work with is the African Business Women, which is NABUI. And this network obviously works with the Business Women Association to identify business women and provide support within the country. So this is the work that we do around the women in business. There's also New Faces, New Voices, which I've mentioned. We've got our partner with us this morning, so she'll speak into us. But really the role is really around expanding the influence of women in the financial sector. And it is really working with women, just like some of you as well, and with also the policy makers. So it's really a two-edged sword, where we are working with women at grassroots level, but we're also engaging with the policy holders. So that is part of the work. And for example, in Uganda, through our network, we were able to make changes around the policy of financing women with regards to loans. So we were able to work with the New Faces, New Voices to champion change in policy when it comes to loans. So it really is practical things that we are working with our networks. We also have the Women in Media Network, so really working, because I think part of it is really, what is the word that's going out there, right? And if we are not working with the relevant people in the media spaces, how are we ensuring that the message that relates to women, the right message, is being is being shared? So that is the reason why we are working with the Women in Media, and that is to influence and ensure that the right messaging around the work that is being done for women is being championed out. The last network that we work with is really around the women in clean energy. And this is a recent one that we've added, and partially because we feel that women have a role to play in the clean energy agenda. And so the reason we have started to work with this network is really to ensure that even with our entrepreneurs, right, how do we make sure that the entrepreneurs that we work with, or the women that we work with, are being involved in the agenda for clean energy? You know, whether it be solar, whether it be wind, whatever the angle is, we make sure that women are getting involved in that space. This is where we as an organization are investing. We are investing in, you know, the data, right? What is the data saying? You know, so we've partnered with different organizations to do different researches around financial inclusion. So I'll just take this opportunity to let you know we do have a summit that's coming up in October, and part of that summit is really bringing stakeholders, women in business, networks to come together in one room and discuss, you know, things like the research. What is the research out there? What is the evidence? And we are going to take that opportunity to share some of the research that we've done. We've done recently research around women and financial inclusion, and we partnered with Facet, who funded us on this, to really see what is the status of financial inclusion for women in South Africa. And we shared that report, I think on the 9th of May, when we launched our New Faces, New Voices. So we are really passionate about ensuring that the research and the evidence is there around financial inclusion. Financial literacy, working with women to ensure that they do understand what it is that involves financial decisions, financial work, managing their businesses, and that is done in different ways. So our program, the Women Creating Wealth, which I explained is sort of the anchor program of the Gresham Michelle Trust, we work with women around providing support with them. We've got an online program that trains women around financial inclusion. So we're big on really ensuring that there's financial literacy for women. Also a supportive policy ecosystem, creating enabling frameworks. Part of it is really the networks that we work with, as well as a gendered investment, unlocking capital for women. And this is really something that we are extremely passionate about, ensuring that women are moving from income creation to wealth generation. Because, you know, if we can't unlock capital for women, they will continue to be producing small little businesses that can only support the family. We want to move from that. Women must be in the rooms where big decisions are made. Women must be in the rooms where millionaires are sitting because they're millionaires themselves. And so this is something that we feel very strongly about. Lastly, I think strong women networks. I did speak about the networks. It's really the collective power that women bring, you know. As we are here, a collective, you know, our voices are louder than me standing here and speaking on my own. So part of it is really working with the networks and making sure that there is a collective bargaining around the women inclusion. I want to just stop at this point. I know we are also pressed for time. We did start late. I want to then just call upon my colleague Bajita to take us a little bit further into what it is that we do when it comes to financial inclusion. And she's going to speak around the work that we do with Afishela. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies. My name is Najita, coming from the Afishela Fund. So the Afishela Fund is a gender-based, gender lens fund that is sponsored by the Gresham Michelle Trust as an initial anchor, but we do have other partners coming through that are supporting the fund. So I'm going to briefly just take you through where Afishela fits in the broader context. You'll see that the theme for today, speaking about a bold shift, right? And I think many of you have been in rooms where we've been panting and talking about the challenges women have, and we've spoken over and over about it, right? But the question now is, what are we going to do about it? What are we currently doing about it? What can we put forward to the G20 to say, look, we've sat as a collective as women with multiple stakeholders. We are now putting together points that we think implemented, and this is something that we're going to be discussing today. Why does Afishela exist, right? We have a problem, right, that we are addressing. Just to take you through the stats, which we will discuss further when we get into the different groups, there's 20% lower loan approval rates for women when it comes to accessing finance. We've got 10% of women who own land as compared to 27% of men that actually own land. What does that do? It reduces our ability to actually have collateral to actually borrow money, right? Up to 71% of women-owned businesses actually self-finance their businesses, and only 27% have actually applied for a bank loan and have been successful. So you see that there are people here who are probably financing their businesses, not going to banks for the reason that the process is complex or takes long, and you want to get business going today, right? And then up to 33% of women-owned SMEs are very small. We're talking about micro businesses. and while 19% are medium-sized businesses. Many of you will know there's multiple unicorns. You've got your Facebooks and things that started off small, your Ubers, Airbnb, that started off small and progressed into larger organizations. The stats show us that women's businesses will perpetually stay to be micro or small, right? We want to work towards an economy where these businesses get into medium stage and then get into being large corporates, and then, of course, your multi-billion dollar unicorns that we have. So what is the opportunity where we can all drive a change? What can we do? So there's a $42 billion gender financing gap. And then gender, right? And then an $8 billion gap for micro SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa, which means there's room for a lot of players to come in and fund this, right? There's some institutional funders that are in this room, so this speaks to you. This stat was as of 2020. I believe now that the stat is actually sitting at 50 billion. So while we think we have progressed, we actually are going back in terms of gender funding. And then 2.2% of venture capital is being allocated to women. So you can imagine, I think in the last few years, probably a few billions have been allocated to a lot of venture capital firms, private equity funds. However, only 2.2% of those have actually been allocated to women. AfriShella sits in that space of that 2.2%. There are a few fund managers here. Janice, who's from a fund manager. Everyone who's coming from a fund manager will tell you how difficult it is to actually raise capital. You knock on a lot of rooms, institutions asking them for money so that you can raise and then actually disburse those funds. And it is a long and tedious process. So this is something that we're aiming to change. And then we have 11% majority women-owned capital providers in sub-Saharan Africa have vehicles larger than 5%. Vehicles larger than 5 million, but less than 20 million, right? So there's definitely an opportunity if we come together as different players to put together policy that will shift that. We have an opportunity to change that within this room and contribute to that. Again, there's about 420,000 women-owned businesses in sub-Saharan Africa, formally registered. I say formally registered because we know that there are a lot of informal businesses. So there's a huge opportunity for all of these businesses to be funded. My colleague Thalma spoke about the Women Creating Wealth program. Our goal within the trust is to actually train 15,000 women. We've managed to train about 5,000 women to be investor ready, and that in itself forms the pipeline for AfriShella once the women businesses have been trained, and some that we fund. However, unfortunately, AfriShella cannot fund everyone. I think we spoke about a 42 billion gender gap, right? We are currently raising a $30 million fund. So if you think $30 million in relation to a 42 billion gender gap, we are very far away. And that 30 million that we're currently raising for is targeted at East Africa and Southern Africa. So we haven't even begun to scratch the surface when it comes to gender lens investing. So when it comes to the bold shift and how we can improve gender financing, we have to really think out of the box, right? What we've done at AfriShella is when we looked at the opportunities on the previous slide, we've had to look and say, what is the market solution that we're coming and we're taking to market, right? So we speak of a dynamic team, right? We're all women in here, but we need men as well. We don't operate in isolation. There's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've got a dynamic team of experienced individuals from across Africa who then come together. The reason why we have a team of local representatives is because we understand the landscape better. We understand the challenges that we're currently facing. And so when you have funds like this and we're working with multiple stakeholders, it's not just AfriShella. We can then ensure that the right solutions are being given to women. So that in itself, having a dynamic team helps us to move closer to a bold shift. right? The opportunity I've already spoken about, 420,000 small businesses to take advantage of, right? Dynamic structures. I think a lot of people are quite familiar that if you want to run a business, it's either equity or debt, right? We've had to think out of the box to say, okay, what would ideally work for women? Because our fund, if I take a step back, funds only women, and it funds women in the missing middle. So those businesses that are too big for microfinance, but that are too big or too small to get bank funding or traditional funding levels. So that is called the missing middle, right? And so we've had to think differently to say, how does that work? So we've come up with self-liquidating mezzanine instruments, which are revenue-based loans and impact-linked loans. And we talk impact-linked loans, we're saying, depending on the industry that you're in, you've got a set interest rate. However, if you can meet certain targets of employing women, employing youth, or reducing your carbon emissions, ensuring women empowerment through impact matrix, we can then reduce your interest rate, which means that it further advances you as a women-owned businesses. Again, we don't work in isolation. AfriShella, while it is a pioneer in gender lens investing, there are multiple other gender lens investing funds. We work with those funds to say, if we have an opportunity that is too big for us to fund, we work with co-investors, some of which are in the room, and we share the opportunities because we believe that we don't shut the door if your business is not aligned to us. Let's share the opportunity and increase the ability to funding. And then what's most important, I spoke about impact matrix, right? One thing that is key when it comes to pushing forward gender lens investing is alignment to the sustainability development goals. Again, I said we're not working in isolation, we're working with multiple parties. So while we're having gendered investments for inclusion, we're also then ensuring we're aligning with the SDGs. So it's how do the SDGs allow us to move forward in our investment process? And then just for the entrepreneurs themselves, what shifts does a vehicle like AfriShella bring? So we use a blended finance structure. I think I've mentioned you've got your banks that are pure commercial, you've got your funds that are looking for high profits, but we're an impact fund, we use blended finance. So a blended finance model takes your commercial funding, grant funding, technical assistance facilities, and then puts it into one pool. What does that do? Instead of borrowing at a rate of, say, 16%, having a blended finance model means that you're charging a rate of only 8%. That's an innovative way for us to then say, okay, come to us, we can fund you, right? And this is something that is becoming more and more common in the industry. And then, of course, a responsive model, which we are piloting with other female fund managers, is alternative credit assessment, right? We've spoken to say, when you go to a typical bank, they'll always ask for typical KYC documents. They want to see what money you have. And we're saying, when you look at the missing middle type of women-owned businesses, you're not going to be able to get some of this business, particularly where they've been informal, moving into a formal setting. We're starting to look at things like awards that some of these women have received. We're also starting to look at digital footprint, right? What is out there in your social media that can contribute towards you being a person who's less riskier? Chances are, if you're more active on social media, for example, you can be traced, you can be found, right? When people ask for an address and say, okay, we don't know where this person is, well, you can find them on social media. I mean, that's just an example, but this alternative credit assessment tool now considers things apart from the 5 C's, which is your collateral, your credit risk and other things. And then we then look at the responsive model and say, how can that work in terms of addressing the funding gap? And then, of course, non-dilutive capital, which is linked to innovative strategy, where the funding that we have will rather support the business. Instead of us taking equity, which is typical to most funds, we would have our mezzanine structure, which can only be converted when is necessary. The last aspect is the post-technical assistance. So what this is it is non-financial support, right? That comes in. So if you're a business, you need a marketing person to come in and help you with a marketing strategy. We bring that person, we find that person, bring that person to support you. So not all help is always financial. You always have to look at non-financial support to see how can we support businesses. So I think this is what AfriShella is doing to kind of contribute towards the funding gap or access to finance and financial inclusion to women. But the question is it enough? What else can we do, not only as AfriShella, but as women within this room, what else can we do to support and reduce that access to financing gender gap for women? So I'll leave you with that thought, because this is something we're going to discuss in the Reikawiru's. And with that, I will introduce Zimkita from the New Faces, New Voices, and team.
So yeah, today I'm wearing the cap of the country head of New Faces, New Voices. Every time I hear, when we're saying New Faces, New Voices, South Africa, everyone is like, we're so excited, we can't wait to see what New Faces, New Voices South Africa is going to do. And that really scares me because of the work the other regions are doing, but we are still new. I am from an organization also called Africa Women Financial Inclusion Initiative, which is the one tasked with establishing this chapter here in South Africa. So I know some people know about New Faces, New Voices, but for those who do not know, it is one of the flagship programs of the Graça Machel Trust, which with the vision of positioning women in leadership roles that enhance Africa's economic competitiveness. Stats shows us that women representation, especially, I think, you'll forgive me if I've got my stats wrong, but percentage of women CEOs within the banking or financial sector, it's only 3%. Only 3%. So, as New Faces, New Voices,